I never imagined that at 72 years old, I would experience the worst humiliation of my life. It happened right there in a packed airport terminal. My own son Ryan was screaming at me. He was putting me on display in front of everyone, treating me like a senile child, like a useless burden whose only purpose was to annoy him, like I had zero value to him anymore. I was at LAX waiting for my flight to visit my sister Teresa. I had just called Ryan. He's my only child. I just wanted to let him know my flight was delayed, so I'd be arriving a little later than planned. It was supposed to be a simple trip, just 3 days to help Teresa. She had broken her arm. But when I explained this to Ryan on the phone, he exploded. I never imagined he was capable of this. Mom, enough with that story. You're always looking for excuses not to watch the kids when Patricia needs to work. I tried to explain. I told him I had planned this trip 2 weeks ago, but he wouldn't listen. What happened next shattered my heart forever. Right there in the middle of the crowded terminal, with people rushing past with suitcases and families saying goodbye, Ryan yelled at me. His voice echoed through the entire lobby. "Stop being so useless. You're not even capable of watching your own grandkids." I felt like the whole world stopped to stare at us. An older lady nearby touched my arm gently, like she wanted to protect me. A young couple looked away in pity. Even the airport staff fell silent watching the scene. I just stood there, shaking, tears stinging my eyes. I couldn't believe those words had come out of the mouth of the son I raised alone after his father died. It was like a stranger was screaming at me, not the little boy I used to hold when he had nightmares. Ryan didn't even wait for a response. He stomped off, leaving me humiliated in front of dozens of strangers who witnessed everything. An airline employee approached carefully and asked if I was okay. Let me dry my tears. I grabbed my carry-on and walked toward the gate. My flight was boarding, but I could barely hear the announcements. My head was spinning. My chest hurt like I'd been punched. As I showed my ticket to the agent, a voice inside my head whispered something that would change everything. If he thinks you're useless, maybe it's time he discovers what you're really worth. Ryan didn't know it yet, but during those minutes of humiliation at the airport, I had made a decision that would change his life forever. On the plane, I couldn't stop shaking. The flight attendant asked if I needed anything, but I just shook my head. How could I explain that my own son had screamed useless at me in front of hundreds of people? How could I tell her that after 73 years of life, after raising that boy completely alone, he saw me as a burden? I settled into my window seat and watched the clouds pass as the plane climbed over Los Angeles. At that moment, something inside me broke for good. It wasn't just the pain of the cruel words, it was the terrible realization that to my son, I had become an obstacle. Someone who existed solely to solve his problems whenever he needed. I remembered all the times in the last few years Ryan had used those exact words. Mom, watch the kids. Mom, pick up the kids from school. Mom, cook for Sunday dinner. Never a please, never a can you help me. It was as if my only function in life was to be available whenever he needed me. And when for the first time in years I needed to do something for my family, help my sister Teresa with her broken arm, I became a selfish, useless person. Tears began rolling down my cheeks as the plane cut through the clouds. An older lady sitting next to me offered a tissue. She smiled with understanding like she had been through something similar. "Family trouble, honey?" she asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. "Oh, sweetie, I went through that too. Kids sometimes forget everything you did for them," she said, taking my hand warmly. I didn't know why, but those words from a stranger comforted me more than any apology from Ryan ever could. Because she was right. He had completely forgotten everything I had done for him his entire life. He had forgotten the sleepless nights when he was sick, the extra jobs I took to pay for his education, all the times I put his needs before my own. To him, I was just the grandma who babysits and nothing more. The flight to Phoenix only took an hour, but those 60 minutes were enough to completely change my life. As I looked out the window at the desert landscape stretching below, I started thinking about things I hadn't considered in years. When was the last time someone asked me what I wanted to do with my free time? When was the last time someone thanked me for something I did? When was the last time I felt valued as a person, not just as an unpaid domestic servant? I couldn't recall a single recent occasion. And that hurt more than all of Ryan's cruel words put together. When the plane landed in Phoenix, something fundamental had shifted inside me. It wasn't just anger or sadness. It was a cold, determined clarity I had never felt before. As I got off the plane and walked through the airport toward where my sister Teresa was waiting, I knew that those 3 days in Phoenix wouldn't just be about helping her with her broken arm. They were going to be 3 days to plan the rest of my life, a life where I mattered just as much as anyone else, a life where no one would ever call me useless again. Teresa was waiting for me at arrivals with her arm in a sling and a worried look on her face. When she saw me, she immediately knew something terrible had happened. "Grace, what's wrong? You look so pale," she said, hugging me with her good arm. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Right there in the airport, I told her everything that happened. Ryan's yelling, the stares of the people, the humiliation, everything. Teresa listened in silence, but I saw her eyes fill with angry tears. "That boy has lost his mind. How dare he talk to you like that after everything you did for him?" she said as we walked toward a taxi. "Grace, you raised that boy completely alone after Michael died. You worked day and night to give him everything he needed. You paid for his college. You helped him buy his house. You've taken care of his children like they were your own, and now he treats you like his servant." Her words confirmed what I already knew in my heart. Ryan had become a completely different person from the sweet, grateful boy I had raised. During the taxi ride from the airport to Teresa's house in Scottsdale, I couldn't stop thinking about the last 5 years since Ryan married Patricia. At first, Patricia was very kind to me. She called me Mom Grace and always included me in family plans. But little by little, especially after the twins Eddie and Evan were born 3 years ago, I started to feel that my role in the family had changed. I was no longer the beloved grandmother who came to visit. I had become the free babysitter who was always available. Weekends were no longer for family bonding, but for me to watch the kids while Ryan and Patricia went out with friends. Holidays were no longer family celebrations, but opportunities for me to cook for everyone while they enjoyed themselves. And when I needed something like this visit to Teresa, I became a problematic person who didn't understand the family's true priorities. As the taxi navigated the suburban streets, I understood that it hadn't been a gradual change. Ryan had been planning to turn me into his personal employee for a long time, and I had been too blind to see it. "We're here, ladies," the taxi driver said, interrupting my bitter thoughts. Teresa's house was small, but cozy, with a garden full of flowers she tended with so much love. While I paid for the taxi, I thought about how different Teresa's life was compared to mine. She was a widow too, but she had learned to live for herself after her kids left home. She had her plants, her friends from the senior center, her favorite shows. She had a life of her own. I, on the other hand, had let my life revolve completely around Ryan and his family. Now I realized how foolish I had been. That first night at Teresa's, after helping her with dinner and making sure she was comfortable, I sat in the small backyard garden under the stars. The fresh desert air calmed me a little, but I couldn't stop dwelling on everything that happened. I stayed there for hours replaying every detail of the airport humiliation, every cruel word from Ryan, every pitying look from strangers. The more I thought about it, the clearer something became, something I had been denying for years. My son didn't love me the same way anymore. To him, I was a convenient resource, not a person with feelings and dignity. But in the midst of all that sadness and pain, something else started to grow inside me. It was a cold, silent determination I had never felt before. If Ryan believed I was useless, then it was time to show him exactly what the value of a useless person was in his life. It was time for him and Patricia to learn to value what they had before they lost it forever. And as the stars shined above Teresa's garden, I began planning the changes that would alter everything. Because at 73, I had finally learned a lesson I should have learned much sooner. No one can humiliate you without your permission, and I wasn't going to give that permission ever again. The night breeze brushed my face as I made the most important decision of my life. Ryan wanted me to disappear from his path, and that was exactly what I was going to do. But not in the way he expected. The 3 days in Phoenix passed in a haze of painful memories and deep reflection. During the day, I helped my sister Teresa with basic tasks. Preparing food with one hand is almost impossible. Showering with a cast on your arm is quite an adventure. Even opening a jar of jelly becomes an epic struggle. But at night, when Teresa fell asleep, I lay awake in the small guest room. I reviewed every moment of my life with Ryan, trying to understand exactly when my loving son had turned into this cruel man who yelled useless at me in front of strangers. I vividly remembered when Ryan was little and his father Michael died in that horrible car accident on the interstate. Ryan was just 12 years old. I remember how he clung to me that terrible night in the hospital, crying and telling me, "Mom, don't leave me alone. Please don't leave me alone." I hugged him tight and promised him I would never abandon him, that we would always be together, that I would be his mom and his dad at the same time. I kept that promise for the next 20 years. I worked as a secretary in a government office during the day, and I cleaned offices at night. I did it to pay for the private school he wanted, the soccer camps he loved so much, the expensive textbooks he needed for his studies. When Ryan turned 16 and all his friends had huge birthday parties, I sold the gold earrings Michael had given me for our anniversary, just to give him the celebration he dreamed of. When he wanted to study business administration at a prestigious private university, one of the most expensive in the city, I took out loans. I worked extra weekends. I even sold my wedding ring to pay the tuition. I never told him I sold the ring. When he asked where it was, I told him I had taken it to get repaired. He never asked again, and I was never able to replace it. Tears rolled down my face as I remembered all those sacrifices made with so much love. When Ryan graduated from college, he hugged me tight at the ceremony. He said, "Mom, everything I am, I owe to you. I will never forget everything you did for me." Those words filled my heart with happiness. I thought all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights working all the meals I skipped so he could eat better, it had all been worth it. My son loved me and valued me, or so I believed at that moment, before realizing that the promises of young people are like smoke. They look beautiful when you make them, but they vanish with the first gust of wind. During his senior year of college, Ryan met Patricia at a campus party. She studied graphic design and came from an upper-middle-class family in a wealthy neighborhood. From the beginning, I noticed Patricia treated me differently than how Ryan described she treated other people. She was polite but cold. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. When Ryan told me he wanted to marry her after graduation, I tried to talk to him about my concerns. He told me I was being overprotective and that I had to learn to let go. The wedding was beautiful in a nice church in West Hollywood. I paid my share of the expenses by working double shifts for 6 months. I never complained because I wanted Ryan to be happy. During the ceremony, when the priest asked if anyone had any objections, a little voice inside my head whispered to say something. I silenced it immediately. How could I ruin my son's happiest day over a strange feeling about his bride? I convinced myself it was just mother's nerves and that Patricia and I would get along better with time. I was so wrong. The first 2 years of marriage were relatively calm. Ryan and Patricia rented a small apartment in a working-class area, and I visited them on Sundays for lunch. Patricia cooked, though not very well, honestly, and Ryan told me about his job at a marketing firm. They were pleasant moments, though I always felt a subtle tension in the air, like Patricia was tolerating my presence rather than enjoying it. But Ryan seemed happy, and that's what mattered to me, until the economic problems arrived. The company where Ryan worked started downsizing. Although he didn't lose his job, his salary was cut significantly. At the same time, Patricia got pregnant with twins, and medical bills began to pile up. One night, Ryan called me crying. "Mom, I don't know what we're going to do. We can't afford the rent, the doctors, the food. Patricia is very stressed with the pregnancy, and I feel like a failure." Without hesitation, I told him I would sell my small plot of land upstate, the one I had inherited from my parents, and give them the money to buy their own house. "But Mom, that land is all you have left from your folks," Ryan said. "It doesn't matter, son. What matters is that you have a safe home to raise my grandkids," I replied. And that's how I sold the last thing remaining from my original family to secure the future of the family I had created. With that money, Ryan and Patricia bought a small but nice 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. One room for them, one for the babies on the way, and one for me whenever I wanted to visit. That last phrase should have alerted me, but I was too excited thinking about my future grandchildren to pay attention to the warning signs. When Eddie and Evan were born, I felt a happiness I hadn't experienced since Ryan's birth. They were beautiful, healthy babies full of life. Patricia had a complicated delivery and needed a lot of help during the first few weeks. I moved into their house temporarily to help with everything: cooking, cleaning, watching the babies at night so Patricia could rest, washing the endless laundry that 2 newborns generate. It was exhausting for a woman my age, but I did it with love because it was my family. What started as a temporary 2-week stay extended to a month, then 2 months, then 6 months. Patricia always had some reason why she couldn't manage alone yet. The babies weren't sleeping well. She was too tired. Ryan worked too many hours. Little by little, without realizing it, I became the resident domestic servant of the house. I was no longer the visiting grandmother who came to spoil the grandkids. I was the person up at 3 a.m. when the babies cried. The one who washed diapers. The one who cooked for the whole family. The one who cleaned the house from top to bottom. But the most painful thing wasn't the physical work. It was the way they gradually stopped treating me like family and started treating me like service staff. The conversations at the table no longer included me. Ryan and Patricia talked about their lives as if I wasn't there. When they had guests, they introduced me as the grandma who helps us, instead of my mom. When they went out with friends on weekends, they simply informed me that I would be staying to watch the kids. They didn't ask if I had plans or if I was too tired. It had become automatic. Patricia craved going to the movies. Ryan wanted to watch the game with his friends, and Grace would stay home with the babies. Period. What hurt the most was that Ryan stopped seeing me as his mother and saw me as a convenience. When the kids were sick and needed extra care, I was the one up all night. When there were doctor appointments, I took them because Patricia had things to do, and Ryan had to work. When the kids started talking, their first words were Mama, for Patricia, Dada, for Ryan, and Nana, for me. But when they needed something, food, a diaper change, comfort, when crying they screamed Nana, and I ran immediately to attend to them. During those 3 years, I slowly lost my own identity. I no longer had friends because I never had free time to cultivate friendships. I no longer had hobbies because all my time was devoted to taking care of the house and children. I no longer had a life of my own because my entire existence revolved around the needs of Ryan's family. And when finally, after 3 years, I decided I needed a few days for myself to help my sister Teresa, I became a selfish, useless person who didn't understand family priorities. That was the final straw. Now sitting in the darkness of Teresa's guest room, I understood perfectly what had happened. Ryan hadn't become a bad person overnight. It had been a gradual process of getting used to me always being available, always willing to sacrifice my own needs for theirs, always ready to say yes to whatever he asked. I had created this monster by teaching him that my time, my energy, my entire life were at his disposal, without limits and without conditions. And now at 73, I was finally paying the price for having been too generous, too permissive, too willing to be the perfect martyr. But I also understood something more important. It wasn't too late to change things. If Ryan had learned to treat me like an employee, he could unlearn that lesson. If he had forgotten my value as a person and as a mother, he could remember it the hard way. And if he really believed I was useless, then it was time to show him exactly how much work a useless person did in his perfect life. The revenge wouldn't be explosive or dramatic. It would be silent, meticulous, and absolutely devastating. On my last day in Phoenix, while Teresa and I had a quiet breakfast in her small kitchen, I told her everything I had been thinking over those 3 days. She listened in silence, nodding occasionally. When I finished speaking, she took my hand and said, "Grace, honey, it's about time you woke up. That boy needs a lesson he will never forget." She was right. Ryan had forgotten who I was and how much I had sacrificed for him. It was time to refresh his memory in the most effective way possible by disappearing from his life and taking with me everything they had been taking for granted. The flight back to LAX was completely different from the flight out. I was no longer the same broken, humiliated woman who had left 3 days earlier. During those 75 minutes in the air, watching the desert disappear beneath the clouds, I mentally finalized every detail of the plan I had formed. It wouldn't be an explosive confrontation or a soap opera drama. It would be something much more effective and devastating. The silent disappearance of everything Ryan and Patricia had taken for granted for years. When the plane landed at LAX, I knew exactly what I was going to do and how I was going to execute it. Ryan was waiting for me at arrivals with the twins, Eddie and Evan. The kids ran toward me yelling, "Nana, Nana," and hugged me with that pure energy that only 3-year-olds have. For a moment, my heart softened seeing them, but I immediately remembered their father's cruel words and strengthened my resolve. Ryan greeted me with a peck on the cheek, but there was no apology in his eyes, no acknowledgement of how terrible he had been to me before my trip. He simply said, "Mom, good thing you're back. Patricia needs to go to the dentist tomorrow morning, and we need you to watch the kids." He didn't even ask how my trip was, how my sister Teresa was doing, if I had rested well. He only informed me of my upcoming responsibilities as if I were an employee reporting back after a few vacation days. I smiled and nodded, but inside something hardened definitely. "Of course, son, no problem," I told him with the same sweet voice as always. He had no idea those would be the last kind words he would hear from me for a long, long time. On the ride back to the house in the suburbs, the kids excitedly told me everything that happened while I was gone. That Dad had burned the eggs at breakfast, that Mom didn't know where their clean pajamas were, that the house was very dirty, according to Eddie. Ryan drove in silence, but I could see in the rearview mirror that every comment from the kids made him more uncomfortable. It was obvious that the 3 days without me had been chaotic for them, but he would never admit it. His pride was too big to acknowledge that he needed the useless woman he had humiliated at the airport. When we arrived at the house, I immediately noticed the mess. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, clothes strewn around the living room, toys scattered everywhere, the kids' beds unmade. Patricia came out to greet me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Grace, good thing you're back. It's been a very difficult few days," she said, but her tone suggested more annoyance than genuine relief. Like my trip had been an irresponsible whim instead of a legitimate family necessity. I smiled and immediately started picking up toys. But for the first time in years, every move I made was part of a bigger plan. That first night at Teresa's, after helping her with dinner and making sure she was comfortable, I sat in the small backyard garden under the stars. The fresh desert air calmed me a little, but I couldn't stop dwelling on everything that happened. I stayed there for hours, replaying every detail of the airport humiliation, every cruel word from Ryan, every pitying look from strangers. The more I thought about it, the clearer something became, something I had been denying for years. My son didn't love me the same way anymore. To him, I was a convenient resource, not a person with feelings and dignity. But in the midst of all that sadness and pain, something else started to grow inside me. It was a cold, silent determination I had never felt before. If Ryan believed I was useless, then it was time to show him exactly what the value of a useless person was in his life. It was time for him and Patricia to learn to value what they had before they lost it forever. And as the stars shined above Teresa's garden, I began planning the changes that would alter everything. Because at 73, I had finally learned a lesson I should have learned much sooner. No one can humiliate you without your permission, and I wasn't going to give that permission ever again. The night breeze brushed my face as I made the most important decision of my life. Ryan wanted me to disappear from his path, and that was exactly what I was going to do, but not in the way he expected. The 3 days in Phoenix passed in a haze of painful memories and deep reflection. During the day, I helped my sister Teresa with basic tasks. Preparing food with one hand is almost impossible. Showering with a cast on your arm is quite an adventure. Even opening a jar of jelly becomes an epic struggle. But at night, when Teresa fell asleep, I lay awake in the small guest room. I reviewed every moment of my life with Ryan, trying to understand exactly when my loving son had turned into this cruel man who yelled useless at me in front of strangers. I vividly remembered when Ryan was little and his father Michael died in that horrible car accident on the interstate. Ryan was just 12 years old. I remember how he clung to me that terrible night in the hospital, crying and telling me, "Mom, don't leave me alone. Please don't leave me alone." I hugged him tight and promised him I would never abandon him, that we would always be together, that I would be his mom and his dad at the same time. I kept that promise for the next 20 years. I worked as a secretary in a government office during the day, and I cleaned offices at night. I did it to pay for the private school he wanted, the soccer camps he loved so much, the expensive textbooks he needed for his studies. When Ryan turned 16 and all his friends had huge birthday parties, I sold the gold earrings Michael had given me for our anniversary just to give him the celebration he dreamed of. When he wanted to study business administration at a prestigious private university, one of the most expensive in the city, I took out loans. I worked extra weekends. I even sold my wedding ring to pay the tuition. I never told him I sold the ring. When he asked where it was, I told him I had taken it to get repaired. He never asked again, and I was never able to replace it. Tears rolled down my face as I remembered all those sacrifices made with so much love. When Ryan graduated from college, he hugged me tight at the ceremony. He said, "Mom, everything I am, I owe to you. I will never forget everything you did for me." Those words filled my heart with happiness. I thought all the sacrifices, all the sleepless nights, working all the meals I skipped so he could eat better, it had all been worth it. My son loved me and valued me, or so I believed at that moment. Before realizing that the promises of young people are like smoke. They look beautiful when you make them, but they vanish with the first gust of wind. During his senior year of college, Ryan met Patricia at a campus party. She studied graphic design and came from an upper-middle-class family in a wealthy neighborhood. From the beginning, I noticed Patricia treated me differently than how Ryan described she treated other people. She was polite, but cold. She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. When Ryan told me he wanted to marry her after graduation, I tried to talk to him about my concerns. He told me I was being overprotective and that I had to learn to let go. The wedding was beautiful in a nice church in West Hollywood. I paid my share of the expenses by working double shifts for 6 months. I never complained because I wanted Ryan to be happy. During the ceremony, when the priest asked if anyone had any objections, a little voice inside my head whispered to say something. I silenced it immediately. How could I ruin my son's happiest day over a strange feeling about his bride? I convinced myself it was just mother's nerves and that Patricia and I would get along better with time. I was so wrong. The first 2 years of marriage were relatively calm. Ryan and Patricia rented a small apartment in a working-class area, and I visited them on Sundays for lunch. Patricia cooked, though not very well, honestly, and Ryan told me about his job at a marketing firm. They were pleasant moments, though I always felt a subtle tension in the air, like Patricia was tolerating my presence rather than enjoying it. But Ryan seemed happy, and that's what mattered to me. Until the economic problems arrived. The company where Ryan worked started downsizing. Although he didn't lose his job, his salary was cut significantly. At the same time, Patricia got pregnant with twins, and medical bills began to pile up. One night, Ryan called me crying. "Mom, I don't know what we're going to do. We can't afford the rent, the doctors, the food. Patricia is very stressed with the pregnancy, and I feel like a failure." Without hesitation, I told him I would sell my small plot of land upstate, the one I had inherited from my parents, and give them the money to buy their own house. "But Mom, that land is all you have left from your folks," Ryan said. "It doesn't matter, son. What matters is that you have a safe home to raise my grandkids," I replied, and that's how I sold the last thing remaining from my original family to secure the future of the family I had created. With that money, Ryan and Patricia bought a small but nice 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. One room for them, one for the babies on the way, and one for me whenever I wanted to visit. That last phrase should have alerted me, but I was too excited thinking about my future grandchildren to pay attention to the warning signs. When Eddie and Evan were born, I felt a happiness I hadn't experienced since Ryan's birth. They were beautiful, healthy babies full of life. Patricia had a complicated delivery and needed a lot of help during the first few weeks. I moved into their house temporarily to help with everything: cooking, cleaning, watching the babies at night, so Patricia could rest washing the endless laundry that 2 newborns generate. It was exhausting for a woman my age, but I did it with love because it was my family. What started as a temporary 2-week stay extended to a month. Then 2 months, then 6 months. Patricia always had some reason why she couldn't manage alone yet. The babies weren't sleeping well. She was too tired. Ryan worked too many hours. Little by little, without realizing it, I became the resident domestic servant of the house. I was no longer the visiting grandmother who came to spoil the grandkids. I was the person up at 3 in the morning when the babies cried, the one who washed diapers, the one who cooked for the whole family, the one who cleaned the house from top to bottom. But the most painful thing wasn't the physical work. It was the way they gradually stopped treating me like family and started treating me like service staff. The conversations at the table no longer included me. Ryan and Patricia talked about their lives as if I wasn't there. When they had guests, they introduced me as the grandma who helps us instead of my mom. When they went out with friends on weekends, they simply informed me that I would be staying to watch the kids. They didn't ask if I had plans or if I was too tired. It had become automatic. Patricia craved going to the movies. Ryan wanted to watch the game with his friends, and Grace would stay home with the babies, period. What hurt the most was that Ryan stopped seeing me as his mother and saw me as a convenience. When the kids were sick and needed extra care, I was the one up all night. When there were doctor appointments, I took them because Patricia had things to do and Ryan had to work. When the kids started talking, their first words were Mama, for Patricia, Dada, for Ryan, and Nana for me. But when they needed something, food, a diaper change, comfort, when crying, they screamed Nana, and I ran immediately to attend to them. During those 3 years, I slowly lost my own identity. I no longer had friends because I never had free time to cultivate friendships. I no longer had hobbies because all my time was devoted to taking care of the house and children. I no longer had a life of my own because my entire existence revolved around the needs of Ryan's family. And when finally, after 3 years, I decided I needed a few days for myself to help my sister Teresa, I became a selfish, useless person who didn't understand family priorities. That was the final straw. Now, sitting in the darkness of Teresa's guest room, I understood perfectly what had happened. Ryan hadn't become a bad person overnight. It had been a gradual process of getting used to me always being available, always willing to sacrifice my own needs for theirs, always ready to say yes to whatever he asked. I had created this monster by teaching him that my time, my energy, my entire life were at his disposal without limits and without conditions. And now at 73, I was finally paying the price for having been too generous, too permissive, too willing to be the perfect martyr. But I also understood something more important. It wasn't too late to change things. If Ryan had learned to treat me like an employee, he could unlearn that lesson. If he had forgotten my value as a person and as a mother, he could remember it the hard way. And if he really believed I was useless, then it was time to show him exactly how much work a useless person did in his perfect life. The revenge wouldn't be explosive or dramatic. It would be silent, meticulous, and absolutely devastating. That first night back after bathing the kids, helping with dinner, and tucking them in with their favorite stories, I sat in my small bedroom. I took out a notebook I had bought in Phoenix. In that notebook, I began to make a meticulous list of everything I did in that house day after day. It wasn't just curiosity. It was documentation. I wanted an exact record of all my work so that when the time came, Ryan and Patricia would understand perfectly what they were losing. The list was longer than I had imagined. Waking up at 5:30 a.m. to prepare breakfast for the whole family, packing the kids' lunch boxes, washing, drying, and ironing all the clothes, cleaning the house from top to bottom every day, doing the grocery shopping, cooking lunch and dinner, bathing the kids, helping them with preschool tasks, reading them stories before bed, getting up in the early hours when they had nightmares, taking them to the doctor when they got sick, organizing birthday parties, babysitting when Patricia had social engagements. The list filled 3 whole pages of the notebook, and that was just what I remembered from memory. The next day, while Patricia went to the dentist and Ryan was at work, I started the first phase of my plan. I called the bank where I had my savings account and asked about all my financial assets. The information I received surprised even me. During all these years of living modestly and spending very little on myself, I had accumulated more money than I remembered. My government pension was substantial. I had savings from my time as a secretary. And there was also an account I had completely forgotten Michael's life insurance money, which I had never touched because I didn't need it. More importantly, I discovered something Ryan had apparently completely forgotten. When I sold my land upstate to help them buy the house, the lawyer explained that for tax reasons, it was better to put the deed in my name temporarily and then gradually transfer it to Ryan. But with all the chaos of the babies and daily responsibilities, that transfer had never been completed. Legally, I was the owner of 60% of the house where we lived. Ryan and Patricia believed it was theirs, but in reality they were living on my property. That revelation changed my entire plan. It wouldn't just be a silent disappearance anymore. It would be a complete lesson on the real value of the things they had been taking for granted. I immediately called Mr. Henderson, the attorney who handled the original house purchase, and scheduled an urgent appointment for the next day. When I explained my situation, he reviewed all the documents and confirmed what the bank had told me. "Mrs. Grace, you have very clear legal rights over this property. If you wish to make changes, you are completely within your rights to do so." During the following days, I maintained my normal routine completely. I got up early, prepared breakfast, took care of the kids, cleaned the house, cooked the meals, but now every activity had a double purpose. Besides fulfilling my family responsibilities, I was meticulously documenting all my work for my future legal files. I took discreet photos of the clean house after finishing my daily work. I kept all the grocery receipts that I paid for with my money. I noted every hour I spent babysitting when their parents went out. Ryan and Patricia didn't notice anything different in my behavior. They continued treating me exactly the same as before, like a convenient employee who existed to solve their domestic problems. Patricia kept going out with friends on Saturday afternoons, automatically leaving me with the kids. Ryan kept arriving from work and sitting down to watch TV while I finished cleaning the kitchen after dinner. Neither of them thanked me even once during that week. Neither of them asked how I felt or if I needed anything. To them, I was part of the house furniture, useful, necessary, but invisible as a person. On Friday morning, while Ryan was at work and Patricia had gone shopping with her friends, I took the kids to my neighbor Hope's house and asked her to watch them for a few hours. "It's urgent, Hope. I promise I'll be back before lunch," I told her. Hope, who had been a silent witness to how they treated me in that house for years, simply nodded and hugged Eddie and Evan affectionately. "Don't worry, Grace. They'll be perfectly fine here. You do what you have to do." I took a taxi downtown and spent the whole morning at Attorney Henderson's offices, finalizing the documents that would change everything. I signed papers to transfer ownership of the house completely to my name. I opened a new bank account where only I had access. I updated my will, removing Ryan as the main beneficiary and leaving everything to a charity for abandoned elderly people. When I left the law building at noon, I was no longer the same woman who had entered that morning. Legally, financially, and emotionally, my new life had already begun. That afternoon, Patricia returned from her shopping trip loaded with bags of new clothes. Clothes bought with the money Ryan earned, money that depended on me watching the kids for free so she could work. She proudly showed off her acquisitions. "Look, Grace, I found this beautiful blouse at Nordstrom. Isn't it divine?" She showed me a blouse that cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. I smiled and congratulated her. But inside, I was making a mental note of every dollar they spent on luxuries while expecting me to live like a selfless nun who needed nothing for herself. Saturday night, Ryan and Patricia went out to dinner with some friends to celebrate Patricia getting a small raise at her part-time job. Of course, I stayed babysitting without anyone asking if I had plans or if I was tired, while I tucked the kids in and read them their favorite story, The Three Little Pigs. I couldn't help but smile thinking about the irony. Ryan and Patricia believed they had built a solid brick house, but in reality, they had built their life on a house of cards. And I was about to huff and puff very, very hard. Sunday morning, after preparing a special breakfast of pancakes and fresh fruit, which would be the last breakfast I would prepare in that house, I sat down at the table with Ryan. With the calmest voice in the world, I said, "Son, I need to talk to you about something important." He looked up from his cell phone with an annoyed expression, as if any conversation with me was an interruption to his relaxing Sunday. "What's up, Mom? Is it urgent? Patricia and I were going to take the kids to the park after breakfast." I smiled and placed my hands on the table. "Yes, Ryan, it's quite urgent. You see, I've been thinking a lot about what you told me at the airport about being useless." His expression changed immediately. For the first time in weeks, I saw a shadow of guilt in his eyes. "Mom, he began to say, but I raised my hand to silence him. "No, let me finish. You're right. I am useless to you all. That's why I've decided to stop being a burden on this family." Patricia, who had been listening from the kitchen, approached the table with a confused look. "What are you talking about, Grace?" I explained in a calm, clear voice that I had decided to move into my own apartment and give them the space they obviously needed. "But Mom," protested Ryan, "you don't need to move. You have your place here. You've always had your place." I smiled at the irony of his words. My place, Ryan, apparently is to be yelled at and called useless in crowded airports. I prefer to find a place where that doesn't happen. The color drained from his face when he understood that I remembered perfectly every cruel word he had said, and then I gave them the news that would change their lives forever. "By the way, since you are going to be alone in the house, you'll need to take charge of all expenses. All utility bills, property taxes, maintenance, everything, because starting tomorrow, I will no longer contribute financially to this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan and Patricia looked at each other with growing panic as they began to process the implications of what I had just told them. For years, they had assumed that my pension and savings would always be available to supplement their family expenses. They had never stopped to calculate exactly how much money I contributed monthly to the domestic economy, but now they were about to find out the hard way, and that was just the beginning of the surprises I had prepared for them. The silence at the breakfast table lasted exactly 17 seconds before Patricia exploded. "You can't do that, Grace. How are we going to pay for everything alone? We don't even know how much all the bills come to each month." Her voice cracked a little at the end, and I could see genuine panic in her eyes. Ryan remained mute, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't fully process what he had just heard. For years, he had taken for granted that I was an inexhaustible source of free labor and financial support. He had never stopped to consider what would happen if that source suddenly dried up. "Well," I told them with a calm that surprised even me, "I guess you'll have to learn. I learned to handle all this alone when I was your age after Michael died. If I could do it being a widow with a small child, you too can do it being two young adults with stable jobs." I got up from the table and started clearing the breakfast plates, but Ryan stopped me, grabbing my arm. "Mom, wait, I don't understand. Why are you doing this? If it's because of what happened at the airport, I already told you I'm sorry. I was stressed. I said things I didn't mean." It was the first time he mentioned the airport incident since I had returned from Phoenix, and the first time he offered anything resembling an apology. But his words sounded hollow, like he was following a script someone had taught him to handle difficult situations. I looked him directly in the eyes and could see there was no real comprehension there, no genuine understanding of the damage he had caused me. There was only panic over the consequences he was facing. "Ryan," I said gently, withdrawing my arm from his grip, "it's not just about what happened at the airport. It's about everything that has been happening for years. You have turned me into your personal domestic employee, and when I finally needed something for myself, you called me useless in front of hundreds of people. That taught me something very important, that I really am useless to you all. That's why I've decided to stop being that." Patricia stood up abruptly from the table, knocking over her chair in the process. "This is ridiculous. You can't just leave us with all the responsibilities. What are we going to do with the kids? Who is going to watch them when I have to work? Who is going to take them to the doctor when they get sick?" The desperation in her voice was palpable. I realized that for the first time in years, I was seeing the real Patricia. Not the polite but distant daughter-in-law. but the woman who had been depending completely on my unpaid work to maintain her lifestyle. "Well," I replied with the same tranquility, "I guess you're going to have to do what millions of working parents across America do, hire a nanny, pay for daycare, or figure it out between the two of you. There are many options available. It's just that now you'll have to pay for them with your own money instead of taking for granted that Grandma Grace will always be available for free." The next 30 minutes were a whirlwind of pleading threats, tears, and emotional manipulation. Ryan tried to use the kids as leverage. But what will Eddie and Evan think when they know their grandma abandoned them? Patricia tried religious guilt. What will people at church say when they know you left your family? They even tried financial bribery. "We can pay you a salary if you want, Mom. How much do you need? $200 a week, $300. The salary offer almost made me laugh out loud. After years of free work 24 hours a day now, they were offering me less than a part-time housekeeper would earn. It was final confirmation that they had never truly valued my contribution to their lives. To them, all my work, all my dedication, all my personal sacrifice was worth peanuts. That realization gave me the final strength I needed to move forward with my plan. "No," I told them firmly. "It's not a matter of money. It's a matter of respect and dignity, things that cannot be bought." I went up to my bedroom and started packing my belongings in the 2 suitcases I had prepared. I didn't have many things. After years of living for others, I had accumulated very few personal possessions. But the few things that were truly mine, I packed with care. Photos of Michael and me in our first years of marriage, love letters he had written me, some books I had bought but never had time to read, and my pearl rosary that I had inherited from my grandmother. While I packed, I could hear Ryan and Patricia talking in low, urgent voices in the living room. Occasionally, I caught fragments of their conversation. "She can't be serious. We'll have to cancel the gym membership. How much does daycare cost?" It was painfully obvious they were beginning to understand the magnitude of what they were losing, but they still didn't fully understand the financial implications of my departure. When I came down with my suitcases an hour later, I found the whole family gathered in the living room. The kids were confused and scared, clearly feeling the tension in the air, but without understanding what was happening. Eddie, the more expressive twin, ran toward me and hugged my legs. "Where are you going, Nana? Why do you have suitcases?" His innocent question broke my heart, but I stood firm. I knelt down to be at his eye level and explained in words he could understand. "Nana is going to live in her own little house for a while, sweetheart, but I'm still going to love you very much. Always." Evan came over too, and I hugged them both, feeling tears threatening to spill from my eyes. These children were not to blame for their parents' mistakes, but unfortunately they would have to learn alongside Ryan and Patricia what it meant to value the important people in their lives. "Mom, please reconsider," Ryan begged me one last time. "We can talk about this. We can make changes. You don't have to go." But his tone remained the same one he'd used to convince a valuable employee not to quit. Calculated, worried about practical consequences, but lacking any real emotional understanding of the damage he had caused. "Ryan," I said, grabbing my suitcases, "for 3 years I have been available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I have sacrificed my own life, my own peace, my own dignity to make your lives easier. And when I finally needed 3 days to help my sick sister, you called me useless in front of hundreds of strangers. That was your response to a lifetime of dedication. There is nothing to reconsider." I called an Uber from my phone, and in 10 minutes it was waiting outside the house. During those 10 minutes, Ryan and Patricia tried different last-minute strategies to change my mind. Patricia cried and promised to treat me better. Ryan talked about family therapy and improved communication. They even mentioned the possibility of giving me more space and personal time. But all their offers sounded like business negotiations, not genuine acknowledgement that they had treated me badly for years. When the car arrived, I took my suitcases and walked toward the door. The kids ran after me, crying and asking when I was coming back. That was the hardest part of the whole process, but I knew it was necessary. If I wanted to teach Ryan and Patricia a lesson they would remember forever, I had to be willing to pay the emotional price it required. "I'll give you my new address later," I told them before getting into the car. "You can bring the kids to visit whenever you want, but only after you learn to treat me with respect." Ryan tried to ask where I was going to live, but I simply closed the door and gave the driver the address of my new apartment in West Hollywood. During the ride toward my new life, I allowed myself to cry for the first time in weeks. They weren't tears of regret, but mixed relief and sadness. Relief because I finally had the courage to stand up for myself. Sadness because it had taken so many years to find that courage, and because the relationship with my son would possibly never be the same again. But there was also a strange feeling of freedom I hadn't felt in decades. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about anyone's needs but my own. The apartment I rented in West Hollywood was small but bright, with large windows overlooking a tree-lined street. It had one bedroom, a small living room, a functional kitchen, and most importantly, it was completely mine. No one was going to yell at me there. No one was going to give me orders. No one was going to take for granted that I existed solely to solve their problems. While unpacking my few belongings, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years. That first night in my new home, I prepared a simple dinner just for myself: mushroom quesadillas and a cup of chamomile tea. I ate it in silence while watching the news. It was strange not having to get up every 5 minutes to serve more food, clean spills, or mediate fights between kids. It was strange not hearing the TV blaring in the living room while Ryan watched sports, or the constant noise of Patricia talking on the phone with her friends. It was strange, but also wonderfully peaceful. Around 9 at night, my phone started ringing. It was Ryan, of course. During the next 2 hours, he called me 17 times. The first texts were begging. "Mom, please answer. We need to talk." The next ones were panic. "The kids won't sleep without their bedtime story. Can you come just to tuck them in?" The last ones were desperation. "Mom, Patricia is crying. We don't know what to do. Please come home." But I didn't answer any calls. Not because I wanted to punish them, but because I needed them to understand that the consequences of treating people badly are real and lasting. For years, they had been able to treat me however they wanted because they knew I would always return, always forgive, always be available. It was time they learned that unconditional love doesn't mean infinite tolerance for mistreatment. By the end of that first week in my new life, I had established a simple but satisfying routine. I woke up when I wanted, ate breakfast without rushing, went for walks in a nearby park, read books I had bought years ago but never had time to enjoy. In the afternoons, I visited small coffee shops, talked to other ladies my age, or just sat on a bench watching life go by. It was a simple existence, but infinitely richer than the life of constant service I had been living. Ryan and Patricia's texts and calls continued throughout that week, but gradually the tone shifted from pleading to real panic. "Mom, the kids got sick and we don't know what to do." "Mom, an electric bill came for $300 and we didn't know it cost so much." "Mom, Patricia had to miss work because we don't have anyone to watch the kids." Every message confirmed what I already knew. They had built their entire life around my unpaid labor, and now that that foundation had disappeared, their whole world was crumbling. But there was one more lesson they had to learn, and I was waiting for the perfect moment to teach it to them. Because they still didn't know the most devastating truth of all, that the house where they lived, the house they considered theirs, actually legally belonged to me. And I was about to show them exactly how much power a useless woman had when I finally decided to use it. 3 months after my move, I had established a routine that filled me with the tranquility I had forgotten existed. I woke up naturally around 7 in the morning, not because of crying children or the need to prepare breakfast for others, but because my body had finally found its natural rhythm after years of being on constant alert. I brewed my coffee slowly, enjoying the aroma and the morning ritual that now belonged completely to me. From my small balcony, I could see daily life in West Hollywood students walking toward college, older ladies like me heading to the market, young families taking their kids to school. It was comforting to observe lives functioning normally without the constant drama that had characterized my recent years. During these months, Ryan had called me exactly 137 times. At first, I counted the calls out of pure curiosity, but then it became a sort of documentation of his growing desperation. The first messages had been denial. "Mom, you're exaggerating. Just come back and we'll talk." The next ones were emotional bargaining. "The kids miss you so much. Eddie asks about you every day." Then came financial panic. "We can't afford daycare and the extra work. We need your help." And finally, genuine terror. "Mom, some papers arrived from the bank about the house. We don't understand what they mean. Please help us." Those last messages indicated to me that the moment for the final revelation had finally arrived. Attorney Henderson had been working discreetly during these 3 months to formalize all legal aspects of my new situation. As the legal owner of the house, I had initiated the necessary procedures to officially establish my property rights, which required notifying all current occupants. Ryan and Patricia had just received official documents informing them that the house where they lived was not theirs but mine, and that their status had changed from owners to tenants. That afternoon, I decided it was time to have a final conversation with my son. Not because I had changed my mind about my decision, but because I wanted to close this chapter of my life with clarity and dignity. I took an Uber to the house in the suburbs, the house that now officially belonged to me, and rang the doorbell like a polite visitor instead of using my key as I had done for years. Patricia opened the door, and the contrast between the woman I had met years ago and the person standing in front of me was devastating. She had lost weight, had deep dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was disheveled in a way that suggested she hadn't had time for self-care in weeks. "Grace," she said in a voice mixing relief and terror, "thank you for coming. We are very confused with all these legal papers." I entered the house and immediately noticed the change. The perfect order I had maintained for years had disappeared. There were toys strewn all over the living room, dirty dishes piled on the dining table, unfolded clothes on the armchairs. It wasn't exactly dirty, but it was obvious no one had the time or energy to maintain the level of organization they had gotten used to when I did all the housework. Ryan came out of the kitchen with Eddie and Evan running behind him. The kids screamed, "Nana," and ran to hug me with that pure energy only 3-year-olds have. For a moment, my resolve wobbled, feeling their little arms around my legs and their happy faces seeing me. But when I looked up at Ryan, I saw that he looked as exhausted as Patricia. His eyes held the same tired desperation, and there was a tension in his shoulders suggesting he had been carrying a weight he wasn't used to bearing. "Mom," he told me with a broken voice, "thanks for coming. The bank lawyer says you are the owner of this house, but that can't be true. We pay for this house. We live here." I sat in the living room armchair, my favorite chair where I had read stories to these kids hundreds of times. I looked at them with the calm of someone who had finally found their center. "Sit down," I told them. "It's time you understand completely what has been happening all these years." During the next hour, I meticulously explained the real legal and financial situation. When I sold my land upstate to help them buy the house, the documents had been structured so that I maintained majority legal ownership. They had been paying a mortgage on a house that wasn't completely theirs. Furthermore, during the 3 years they had lived here, I had been contributing between $4,000 and $6,000 monthly in household expenses, food, utilities, maintenance, without them even noticing. "But Mom," Ryan protested, "we didn't know you were paying so much. If you had told us—" I interrupted him with a sad smile. "Ryan, I prepared all the meals. I paid for groceries. I paid the gas bill. I paid the cleaning service when the lady came twice a week. Where did you think the money for all that came from? Did you believe food magically appeared in the refrigerator?" The silence that followed was educational. For the first time, I could see on their faces the exact moment they began to understand the magnitude of what they had been taking for granted. It wasn't just the housework. It was a massive economic contribution they had never acknowledged because it was delivered silently without invoices or receipts to sign. Patricia started crying. They weren't manipulation tears like the ones she shed when I announced my departure, but tears of genuine understanding of what they had lost. "Grace, forgive me. I didn't realize how much you were doing for us. I thought you were just helping a little." Just helping a little, I repeated, savoring the irony of those words. Patricia, I was your housekeeper, nanny, cook, chauffeur, and main financial contributor all at the same time. And when I finally needed 3 days to help my sick sister Ryan screamed useless at me in front of hundreds of people in an airport. That taught me exactly how much you valued all my help. Ryan stood up abruptly from the sofa and started pacing the living room. But we wanted you here. This is your house. You are family. His voice held the desperation of someone who finally understands they have lost something irreplaceable and doesn't know how to get it back. Ryan, I told him with a patience that surprised myself. You didn't want me, you wanted my services. There was a very important difference, and it took you 3 months without me to understand it. I got up from the armchair and walked toward the window overlooking the small backyard garden. The garden where I had played with Eddie and Evan, where I hung clothes in the sun, where I found small moments of peace amidst years of constant service. During these 3 months, I continued, I have remembered who I was before becoming your personal employee. I have new friends in my building. I read books I bought years ago but never had time to enjoy. I take watercolor painting classes at the community center. I go to the movies alone when I want. I eat ice cream for dinner if I feel like it. They are small pleasures, but they are completely mine. But Mom, Ryan pleaded, you can do all those things and also live here with us. We can change, we can make things different. I turned to look directly at him. Different how, Ryan? Are you going to pay me a fair salary for all the work I do? Is Patricia going to genuinely thank me for every meal I prepare? Are you going to ask me if I have plans before assuming I can watch the kids? Are you going to consult with me on important family decisions, or are you just going to promise me respect until things settle down and then gradually return to old patterns? The silence that followed answered my question better than any word they could have said. They knew, and I knew that the changes they promised would be temporary. Deep down, they still saw me as the grandmother who existed to solve their problems, not as an independent woman with a right to her own life and dignity. So what's going to happen with the house? Patricia asked in a small voice. Are you kicking us out? No, I told them, and I could see immediate relief on their faces. But things are going to change fundamentally. You are going to pay rent to live here. Fair market rent, not a discounted family price. You are going to take charge of all household expenses, utilities, maintenance, everything. And most importantly, you are going to learn to value what you have before taking it for granted. During the next 2 hours, we discussed the practical terms of their new situation. The rent we established was less than they would pay anywhere else for a similar house, but high enough so they felt the real weight of their financial decisions. We also established clear rules about visits. They could invite me for Sunday lunch if they wanted, but they had to genuinely invite me, not inform me I was coming. They could ask me to watch the kids occasionally, but they had to ask in advance and accept no as a valid answer. Most importantly, they were never again going to take for granted that I was automatically available to solve their crises or make their lives easier. If they wanted my help, they would have to ask for it respectfully and be prepared to look for alternatives if I couldn't or didn't want to help. When I was getting ready to leave that afternoon, Eddie and Evan hugged me tight and asked when I was coming back to live with them. It was an innocent question that broke my heart, but also strengthened me in my decision. I'm not going to live here again, my loves, I told them honestly. But I'm still going to love you always, and you can visit me at my new house whenever you want. Ryan walked me to the Uber I had called. At the door, he took my hands and said something I had been waiting to hear for months. Mom, I realize now everything you did for us all these years, and I realize how badly I treated you. I have no excuses. I was a terrible son and a selfish man. I don't deserve you, but I hope someday you can forgive me. It was the first genuine apology I had received from him. The first one that came from real understanding instead of panic over consequences. Ryan, I said, squeezing his hands, I already forgave you. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to how things were before. It means we can build something new and better based on mutual respect instead of automatic expectations. 6 months later, our relationship had found a new balance. Ryan and Patricia had learned to manage their domestic life without depending on me for everything. They had hired a part-time nanny for the days they both worked. They had learned to cook basic meals and developed routines that worked for their nuclear family. It wasn't perfect. The house was never as tidy as when I managed it, and occasionally they had minor domestic crises, but they were functional as an independent family. I visited them for lunch 1 or 2 Sundays a month, but as a beloved guest, not an automatic employee. I brought gifts for the kids when I wanted, not because it was my responsibility. I helped with occasional problems when they asked me respectfully and when I had time and energy, but never again as an assumed obligation. Most importantly, I had recovered my own life. My Tuesday nights were dedicated to watercolor painting classes. Thursday mornings I went with my new friends from the building for breakfast and to walk around West Hollywood Park. Saturday afternoons I read in cute coffee shops nearby, enjoying books I had bought years ago but never had time to savor. They were simple pleasures, but deeply satisfying after years of living solely for others. One December afternoon, while watering plants on my small balcony, I reflected on everything that had changed in my life during this year. The pain of that humiliation at the airport had been the catalyst I needed to acknowledge that I had completely lost my identity in my desire to be the perfect mother and grandmother. I had confused unconditional love with infinite tolerance for mistreatment, and I had taught my family that they could treat me any way they wanted because I would always be there. But I had also learned something beautiful. It is never too late to recover your dignity and reclaim your life. At 74, I had found a version of myself I had forgotten existed. A woman with her own interests, her own friendships, her own dreams and aspirations. It wasn't a selfish version of myself, but a balanced version that could love her family without sacrificing her own identity in the process. Ryan had called that morning to ask if I wanted to join them at the zoo next weekend. It was a genuine invitation, not a disguised order. And when I told him I already had plans to see a play with my friends, he simply said, "That's great, Mom. I hope you enjoy it." There was no guilt trip, no manipulation, no suggestions that my plans were less important than theirs. It was a normal interaction between an adult who respects another adult's autonomy. That night, while preparing my simple dinner of quesadillas and chamomile tea, I thought about how strange and wonderful it was to live without the constant sound of other people needing things from me. I didn't miss the chaos, but I did occasionally miss Eddie and Evan's spontaneous hugs. The difference was that now when I saw them, those hugs were genuine moments of connection instead of interruptions to an endless flow of responsibilities. Sometimes when I was alone in my apartment at night, I allowed myself to wonder if I had done the right thing. Had I been too harsh? Had I sacrificed family unity for my personal pride? But then I remembered the feeling of standing in that airport, shaking with humiliation, while my own son screamed useless at me in front of hundreds of strangers, and I knew I had taken the only decision that preserved my dignity as a human being. The silence I had chosen to maintain wasn't a silence of resentment or revenge. It was the silence of a woman who had finally learned that her value didn't depend on how much she could give to others, but on how much she respected herself. It was the silence of someone who had found peace in her own decisions and didn't need constant validation from others to feel complete. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give the people you love is teaching them to value what they have before losing it. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the silence you choose to keep. A full year had passed since that terrible morning at the airport, when Ryan screamed at me in front of hundreds of people. Now, as I celebrated my 75th birthday in my small West Hollywood apartment, I reflected on everything that had changed in my life. Flowers I bought for myself adorned the table, along with a small cake I ordered from the corner bakery. It was a modest celebration, but completely mine. Ryan had called early that morning to wish me happy birthday and ask if he could come visit in the afternoon. His voice sounded different now, more humble, more self-aware. There was no longer that automatic expectation that I would say yes to whatever he asked. "Is it okay if I come with the kids around 4?" he had asked. "We have a gift for you, but if you have other plans, we can come another day." That simple question, that consideration for my own plans, showed me how much things had changed. During this last year, I had discovered aspects of myself I had completely forgotten. In my watercolor painting classes, I found a natural talent I had never explored. My paintings of flowers and urban landscapes now decorated the walls of my apartment, constantly reminding me that I had skills and passions beyond caring for others. The teacher misses. Carmen had told me I should consider selling some of my work at the Saturday art market. I had also developed genuine friendships that weren't based on family obligations or practical needs. Hope, my neighbor from next door, had become a close confidant. She was also a widow and had gone through similar experiences with adult children who took her constant availability for granted. Our Thursday morning coffee conversations on her small balcony had become one of the most precious moments of my week. "You know what I admire most about you, Grace," Hope had told me the previous week. "It's that you had the courage to reclaim your life when many women our age just resign themselves to being invisible." Her words touched me deeply because I recognized the truth in them. I had been about to resign myself to being invisible, to accepting that my only function was to facilitate the lives of others regardless of the personal cost. The transformation in Ryan had been gradual but genuine. The first few months after my move, his calls had been desperate, focused solely on what he had lost and how to get it back. But gradually, he had started asking me about my own life, my new interests, my feelings. He had started really listening to my answers, instead of just waiting for his turn to talk about his needs. Patricia had also changed, though, more subtly. She no longer treated me like a convenient employee, but like an older woman who deserved respect and consideration. When they visited, she genuinely asked about my painting classes, my new friends, the books I was reading. She had started seeing beyond my function as grandmother and domestic employee, acknowledging that I had a full and interesting life independent of them. The kids, Eddie and Evan, now 4 years old, had adapted surprisingly well to the new arrangements. When they visited me or I visited them, our time together had a different quality. I was no longer the exhausted grandmother always busy with domestic tasks, but the grandmother who had time and energy to really play with them, to listen to their stories, to teach them new things. Paradoxically, by establishing clear limits, my relationship with them had become richer and genuine. The financial aspect of my new independence had turned out to be a revelation. Without the constant expenses of maintaining a household for 5 people, my pension and savings allowed me to live comfortably and even treat myself to some luxuries I had never allowed myself before. The previous month, I had taken a weekend trip to Santa Barbara with Hope and 2 other friends from the building. We visited museums, ate in nice restaurants, and walked through the streets without rushing. It was the first time in decades I had traveled purely for pleasure, and the experience had been revelatory. I had also started volunteering at a community center for seniors. Once a week, I taught basic cooking classes for ladies who had recently become widows and needed to learn to cook for one person. It was rewarding to use my culinary skills to help other women who were navigating difficult changes in their lives. The work gave me purpose, without exploitation, satisfaction, without exhaustion. As I prepared my apartment for Ryan and the kids' visit that afternoon, I thought about how different it felt to anticipate their arrival. There was no longer that feeling of dread that they were going to arrive with a list of problems I needed to solve or tasks I needed to complete. Instead, there was genuine anticipation of spending quality time with people who had finally learned to value my company as a person, not just my services as a free employee. When they knocked on the door exactly at 4, I opened it to find Ryan carrying a framed painting, while Eddie and Evan ran toward me with colorful balloons. "Happy birthday, Nana!" They shouted in unison, and their spontaneous hugs filled my heart with a pure joy I had forgotten existed. "Mom," Ryan said with a shy smile, "we know you've been taking painting classes, so we got your favorite flower painting framed." He showed me one of my watercolors painted the previous month, an arrangement of red and white roses that had been particularly satisfying to create. Seeing my own artistic work professionally framed moved me in a way I hadn't anticipated. We spent a relaxed and genuine afternoon. The kids played with some toys I kept in my apartment specifically for their visits, while Ryan told me about his work and future plans. For the first time in years, he asked me about my own plans, my upcoming classes, my friendships, my painting projects. It was a conversation between adults who respect each other, not a briefing session from an employer to an employee. When they were getting ready to leave that night, Ryan hugged me and whispered in my ear, "Mom, I know I can't undo the damage I caused you, but I want you to know that these months have taught me who you really are. Not just my mother, but an incredible woman with her own full and interesting life. I feel proud to be your son." Those words, spoken with genuine sincerity, healed wounds I didn't even know I still had. After they left, I sat in my favorite armchair by the window and looked at my reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at me was different from the one she had been a year ago. She had recovered something in her eyes, a spark of her own life, an assurance in her own value that had been absent for too many years. She wasn't a woman embittered by difficult experiences, but a woman who had found wisdom and strength through them. That night before sleeping, I wrote in the journal I had started keeping after my move. Today I turned 75, but I feel like my real life is just beginning. I learned that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity, to rediscover who you are beyond what you do for others, to choose self-respect over the comfort of others. The scream that changed everything wasn't just Ryan's cruel words at the airport. It was the silent scream of my own soul, demanding finally to be heard and valued. We are curious to know how far this story reached. Where are you following us from? Comment below.